Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast. This is episode number 17 with Dr. Brian Bourke, another return guest for me. Just a really awesome, kind of curious, thoughtful higher ed faculty member that, just really appreciate talking to. Really appreciate that he shares my love of Star Wars novelizations. They do hold a special place in my heart. Read them a lot in high school, and obviously just a huge Star Wars fan in general. But besides that, talk all about a lot of great stuff just to get to know Brian a little bit better and showcase the super cool guy that he is. So as always, check out all the cool stuff that we talk about in the show notes. And after this brief message from our sponsor, this is episode number 17 with Dr. Brian Bourke. It's an honor to have our good friends at SwiftKick be a sponsor of the podcast because I've seen their work firsthand and it's truly unlike any student leadership training I've experienced. They've been voted Best Student Leadership Program unprecedented 5 times, so you know they must be doing something right. As a bonus for our listeners, SwiftKick is giving a $500 discount off their normal speaking fee if you mention Higher Ed Geek when you contact them. I highly recommend their trainings for your campus as your students will be talking about it for months afterwards. It's really great stuff. Check them out, swiftkick.hq.com to learn more and let them know I sent you. Now, back to the show. So we'll go ahead and dive right in here. I'll link out again to the other episode that we did before, just so people can get a little bit of your background from there. But if you want to also just give your introduction and your professional journey, we'll try to segue a little bit from that to kind of focus on your college experience, whether that's undergraduate or graduate coursework and that sort of thing. But kind of just give that Cliff Notes version of how you got to be where you are today.
I'm going to kind of start in the present and go backwards. So I've been at Murray State University for almost 4 years now and am up for tenure right now, and everything is looking good. And got to Murray State after being denied tenure at Louisiana State University, where I was a faculty member on the higher ed program. And I should say I'm in the what we call post-secondary ed administration program at Murray State. And it's just our title for higher education and student affairs type of grad program. And so I was at LSU for 6 years and had a good experience there professionally. Definitely kind of figured out what I was doing as a scholar. Really worked to focus my work and kind of evolve my work, where I had started as a doc student looking kind of very broadly at what are diversity experiences on college campuses, how do students of color experience a predominantly white institution, and as my work has evolved, as I mentioned, really looking more and more at less of what are those experiences, but how do we address those experiences in a way that reduces some of the negativity that people from marginalized populations experience on campuses. So focusing much more on social justice, and not just because it's like the in vogue thing to look at in our field right now, but really thinking critically about social justice from the perspective of how do we work to eliminate these systemic issues in college campuses. And so then kind of continuing the trek backward, I did my doc work at the University of Alabama. And as I said, focused very much on diversity and how students experience college campuses, students from minoritized backgrounds. I worked in residence life while I was working on my doctorate. And prior to working in res life at Alabama, I was a live-in hall director at the University of South Carolina, which is where I got my master's degree in student personnel services. And that's where everything started for me, was that master's program. As an undergrad, I was involved in student government and campus activities type of stuff, but never lived on campus. And so when I started looking at wanting to go to grad school and kind of figured out that, hey, I can do student affairs and that's like a real career, which is cool. I kind of had this thought that, well, I need to learn about the residential experience because I didn't have that myself. And so when I went on for my master's and interviewed for assistantships, I was really hoping to find a way into the res life world, really for the purpose of learning. And not that I felt like I was called to be a residence life professional or anything like that. I wanted to learn that experience by having the experience.
Right. Yeah. And that's interesting. Yeah. Just that, like, you didn't, because I think a lot of people come up that way through undergrad, that they were an RA or lived, they might have lived on campus or something, but that you kind of almost sought that out just purely for like, I just want to be there. Like, just almost like an immersive learning experience for, just being in higher education and stuff. And so that's pretty cool that you did get the opportunity to do that. So I guess, like I said, I'm curious if, you obviously got turned on to a career in higher education student affairs, and, you've kind of gone forward on that path. Was there anything kind of, any anecdote or kind of morsel of like a thing that you learned from a mentor or class that really has like driven you kind of forward with what you've chosen to focus in, like anything that was just like really impactful, like what it gave you personally and or professionally?
Yeah, I've been thinking about kind of what was it about college, the undergraduate experience, that got me here today, to 2018. And I was just at our state student affairs conference for the College Personnel Association of Kentucky, which is one of ACPA's state chapters. And somebody made the comment that if you look at research or even anecdotal stuff that we see in Inside Higher Ed and the Chronicle, so much of what folks retain and remember from undergrad had nothing to do with their classes. But for me, it was actually a mix. I don't know how much content I recall from classes, just like I don't know how much content I recall from leadership seminars and things like that from the student affairs-y stuff that I was involved with. But there are definitely lessons that I got from both in-class and out-of-class experiences. And I actually emailed my undergraduate advisor not too long ago. I actually email her every so often, just kind of give her a reminder that, Dr. Rook, that there are things that you did as a professor that I do today. And I think it's important to let folks know the impact that they had. And I saw a write-up for a professor that I had for film studies in my senior year, and I just started thinking about, okay, what did I get from that other than a greater appreciation for film and what we can glean from studying film. But I tell you, so Dr. Murlock was my film professor, and he was just so enthusiastic. He was excited about what he was teaching. And so just one example, that's something I try to bring into my classes. I want students to feel like they see that I'm excited about what we're studying in that class. Because I'm sure we've all been in that class where, and I tell the students, I had a professor, and he probably tells you something, I don't remember his name. He would come in, put the book on the podium, and read from the textbook. And that was our class session.
Wow.
And so students kind of sit there and they giggle. I'm like, no, that's real. But I hope that you leave this class, maybe you don't remember the content, but maybe there's some lesson that you get from the class. And part of that comes from that enthusiasm piece.
Right.
And then I'll share one of the lessons from my master's program. One of the faculty members from our program just passed away. His name was Dr. Michael Sutton. And one of the things that I got from classes with him was that it's important to be kind to people. And he would always use the example of, be kind to the custodial staff and the maintenance staff because they have access to your office. I thought, okay, that's a good lesson.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's another piece. It's not just about that tangible, you better watch yourself type of thing as a motivation to be kind, but that reminder that we're all connected and we're all working for the same purpose. And so that was actually something I got from my assistantship in Res Life at South Carolina, was that we're all working toward the same purpose. No matter what your role is in the organization or at the university, we're all there for the same reason. And so it's important to keep that in mind. And when you keep that in mind, hopefully it'll be a reminder that you just be nice to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because it's like just even on your campus, at your institution, sort of like, rising tide raises all the ships. If like we're all working together well, we're all sort of like helping each other, and if we have like expertise or resources that we could give each other or something, it's only going to be beneficial for all of us to be able to be supported to do our best work, and that can take shape in a lot of different ways, and just like what you were saying. I mean, so just that be kind aspect, but then with the the enthusiasm piece, like that energy is always going to be kind of contagious and infectious, just when in any aspect of our jobs and stuff. And it's certainly a big thing for me, is just that kind of nerdiness, the geeking out and all that, is that like you find that angle to whatever you're talking about that you can really plug into and kind of build that out. Because it's like you might not be as excited about one thing, especially if you're teaching. If it's like, all right, I have to teach this course. Like this week we're doing this. I really like that. This other week, I'm not really as into that. But like, try to find some angle to it or application that you can get excited about. Because it's like your two examples. Like you've had both kind of polar ends of what that can look like, whether someone's doing it really well or not so well. But so I think that's definitely it. I keep reiterating it because it's like, I just want to remind myself, but just make sure I'm highlighting sort of like, with this podcast, I want to show, like how we can bring our enthusiasms into our work and how our hobbies kind of benefit our lives, and just kind of, some overlap between where our passions and our strengths kind of intersect and stuff like that. So it's just like all that stuff, because I think it's definitely a great asset to have that enthusiasm just in our worlds and in our work and in our lives, whatever it might be. But and so I guess, with all of that, where you're at now, what do you enjoy most about your current work? Like what's keeping you motivated and excited? And maybe it is, trying to find those angles about how to really bring in kind of a positive energy and kind of enthusiasm to the things that you do. But just kind of what's some of the parts that you enjoy most about your current work.
So when I think about my work now, Murray State is a teaching institution that is first and foremost in the work that we do as faculty. And thinking about that focus, and I mean, it's driven home in everything that we do. When I was hired, the provost at the time at new faculty orientation, kind of his message to new faculty was that above all else, be known as a good teacher. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, that's really that's what led me to want to pursue a doctoral degree, was to be a teacher and to teach in this type of program, in a master's program. And so what really gets me excited and what I enjoy about this work kind of in this space is the ability to really focus on, okay, what do I want students to get from this set of readings for a particular class? Or, okay, they're writing this paper. Beyond the process of writing a paper, what do I really want them to get out of it? So I feel like I'm really able to think critically about what I want them to get. And so something that I do, and it's so funny, I sometimes see colleagues, and this has been true of different places I've been, kind of roll in a couple of days before classes, update the dates on their syllabus. They're ready to go. They're not changing the textbook. Everything's good. Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes I might do that as well. But what I've really gotten into in the last couple of years is really thinking about, okay, what's new, what's hot in terms of scholarship on our field? And depending on the class, where does it fit? So there's been a lot more. Seems like there are more spaces for scholars to really engage in some critical conversations about trans students in higher education, trans faculty, trans staff. And so I want to make sure that the students in my classes are exposed to that outstanding scholarship. And so I look for ways, how can I bring in those perspectives that they may not be getting in other classes, they may not get in other spaces. And so I really enjoy that opportunity to think about, okay, what are the connections between these disparate areas of scholarship that are all connected to higher education and student affairs, and where do they fit in the courses that I teach?
Yeah, I mean, and that's to a certain extent. If you build, I'm sure, like if you build a good course, it's like like most of the stuff there is just like that's what we're doing. That's good stuff to know, and we're not gonna always try to like reinvent the wheel. But it's like at least go through a little bit more deliberately. So like you said, like update things, because it could be like, well, with this concept, and again, maybe that's where you can bring the enthusiasm in. It's like, oh yeah, there's really like a current event that's going on that represents this really well, versus just kind of like carbon copying year after year after year. And I think I know that's definitely for me, like kind of that yearning for kind of like an application of a concept, or like put something into context where it's like, like this, thing, this is where it's been going over time and where we are currently with, stuff that, like higher ed it's been around for a while. There's a lot of context to look over, and I think we shouldn't just like, stop it at a certain point where it's just like, well, I mean, that's like when the theories were developed or what, like, it's like, no, there's like, current applications of like, well, how does this represented now? Or, like how would we reinvent something if we're, to sort of come up with a theory now or something. But, there's definitely a lot of room for, just being like, what's going on now? Let's, bring that in one way or another. But, so I guess, so we talked a lot about, just sort of like enthusiasm, I think, and sort of that energy professionally. So I guess I'm curious, maybe it's stuff that's still kind of in the professional realm, but, if it's other stuff personally, like what are you geeking out about currently? I know when we talked last time for the other podcast, we were talking about like adult learners, and I'm not sure if there is just certain kind of like student populations like that you really like kind of delving into deeper, or just like pure kind of personal fun hobbies that you're geeking out about currently, stuff that you've been into for a while or just discovered. But just kind of lay that landscape out for us here, I guess. So like just the things that you're really getting excited about lately, whether it's, I guess, personal or professional.
Yeah. So I guess something I've really been geeking out about, and it's connected to this idea of being at a teaching institution, is the idea of gamification in teaching. And so I've really been digging into that in a few different forms. So last spring, in spring of 2017, I had a class that I offered. It was online, and I treated it as an immersive game experience. And so students assumed a role for being a consultant for a board of trustees for an institution they're bringing a new president in to clean up a mess of an institution. And so as students went through the game experience, they had to discover different pieces of information, maybe sift through things to determine what's really most relevant. So newspaper clippings, things like that, budget reports, and then couple that type of stuff together, that's information that's about this fictitious institution, blend it together with readings as they go through the course, and prepare some guiding documents for this new faculty member coming in. And it was a lot of fun to put that together. It was a big challenge to put it together, so that it just didn't become, okay, do these readings, then do this little activity, then go on to the next thing. I wanted to make sure that, like with the role-playing game, the gamer is progressing as they go through. And so this semester I'm teaching the same course, but it's face-to-face, it's live. And so I still have the game element built in. And so as we're having our class discussions, I say, okay, it's time for us to start to put some of these pieces together to guide this new president, or to provide her with the information that she needs to assume this role and right the ship. And so it's been really interesting to do that in these two different realms, the online realm versus the face-to-face realm. And it requires some different approaches. But it's been a lot of fun. And I guess, it's something I've gotten into in the last couple of years. I actually probably read up on gamification and did a lot of research around it for about a year and a half or so before I made the leap and really dove in last spring for a full course. But I think I've always engaged in some type of gamification or game-based play in my classes. This was the first time I'd done a full class that was structured around a game, but I've always had some sort of gamed element in my classes, whether it's, I think a lot of us who come from student affairs programs are used to case studies. Mm-hmm. Well, that can be a gamed type of experience. You're assuming a particular role. You're having to think through, okay, what are the alternatives? If I do this, does that then facilitate other things happening, like a domino effect? So that's very much a gamed type of thing. And so I'm really into it. I actually have a book chapter coming out, I think it's sometime this year, about gamification and how it can be a useful tool to help engage critical thinking and other higher order thinking skills.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really, that's like a right proper thing to geek out about is, gamification. And yeah, I'd done some podcast episodes previously about that. I'll have to link out to those if people are curious. But yeah, again, just geeking out about a system like gamification, which can kind of nurture enthusiasm in others, might be subject matters that people will be like, I don't know if I'm into that or not. But it's like you put this system together that allows them to interact with it in a different way and, incentivizes really like getting into it. Yeah, that's really smart and really cool. And I hope more people do it because, I think, like you said, people are probably primed for it in terms of either delivering the content. They probably do similar things or, that's obviously like the goal they want to achieve through that system. And then, whether we know it or not, a lot of the things in our lives are gamified. It's all these different apps that it's like, oh, you can get badges and you can get like perks and stuff. It's like, whether we know it or not, we're very familiar with these concepts. So it's like, why not bring it into, the education realm?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really cool that you're exploring that more. And I guess with those sort of things, if you want to kind of mention anything else that are like hobbies and interests of yours, like how do you see those things positively contributing to your life? I can kind of see the direct line, like you're exploring these other ways of kind of delivering educational content, which is then engaging your students more and, creating kind of more positive outcomes that way. But, anything else just in terms of, like those hobbies and interests that you have, and being curious and being someone who is thoughtful and putting these things together, like how is that kind of continually added value to your life?
Yeah. So I'm really into woodworking as a hobby that is completely separate from anything to do with my professional roles. And what I really enjoy about woodworking is it requires a very close focus on what I'm doing. Otherwise, I lose a finger. So it's for me, it's a good way to decompress, to really not have to think about other stuff that's going on, because if my mind wanders, there's a very good chance I can injure myself or worse. And so when I'm woodworking, it's about being focused in another realm, in another place. But it also kind of thinking about that space of engaging different ways of thinking and engaging curiosity. Woodworking is all about problem solving for me. Right now I'm very much, I build things from a very utilitarian perspective. So we had a week where we were out because we got snowed in January. But so the first thing I did, I shoveled a path as best I could to my workshop. So I went out there and I made some cabinets for my wife's craft room. Well, I couldn't go to Lowe's and get materials. Well, I was in the process of taking apart something else that the previous homeowner left behind. So I now had this material that I could repurpose. But I had to make sure that I was very intentional about how I made my cuts to make sure that I got all the pieces I needed from this material that I had, and it worked out. I had just enough. But if I just gone in and said, well, I'm going to kind of get whatever looks prettiest. I also had an 8-foot long piece that had a little bit of a twist to it. So I had to think about, okay, are there places I can cut it to where I've got then flatter pieces where I can compensate for the twist. So woodworking, like I said, it provides that space where I'm engaged in problem solving. I joke around sometimes that I go out to my workshop and I make sawdust. And sometimes I do. I just go out there and I'm like, well, I need to break down these pieces, and I've got 15 minutes of free time. So yeah, I'm basically just making sawdust at that moment. But it's a way for me to engage my brain in some different ways. Not that I don't engage in problem solving in my professional life, but it's different. And also, I don't have any training in woodworking beyond watching This Old House and the New Yankee Workshop when I was growing up. My dad had a workshop, and we would watch the PBS shows and then go in the workshop, and I'd basically watch him hit his hand with the hammer and cuss. So that was my training, was how to curse as a result of hurting oneself in the workshop. But so I don't have any of that formal training, and I've been very fortunate to have opportunities to acquire tools, either through my dad had a friend who was getting on in years and had some deteriorating health. My dad would go help him with something, and next thing you know, my dad's bringing a tool home. And then next thing I know, those tools are ending up in my workshop. And then also, as a faculty member, our job is largely conceived of is August through May. So then summer teaching and things like that offer a little extra financial resource to get my hands on things. And everything that I get, there's a utilitarian perspective for it, but also there's an opportunity to learn something new.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's really great stuff, yeah, because it's just, and I think this is almost something like that for me, or just like the writing that I do, it's just like a creative hobby, it kind of brings in that energy to kind of flourish in your mind to then, like you said, it's not like I'm not problem solving or doing this in my everyday work life, but it's like doing that it just like opens up the windows in your mind to kind of like let some creative energy, like versus if you're just kind of like, maybe just more in a paradigm for most of the time, and then otherwise just kind of just like passively, like, like watching TV, or just, you're not really engaging your mind in a different way. It's just like having some little punctuations in your week of just like, yeah, I get to work with my hands. I get to make something. I get to, like you said, like just focus, and, it really does require that precision. Cause I think sometimes in our life, and that can be okay. It applies to different things, but if you're just sort of like, oh, I'm doing this thing and we tried it and it got close enough and that was fine. It's like, imprecise, and sometimes, or like just in kind of these social sciences, there's never an exact answer, but it's
right.
Like, I think your woodworking, it's like, this measurement of this thing goes in this, place, and it's, like it needs to be precise and kind of, that, just is a different world. And I think that's a very, very good one that like allows you, just to kind of click into a different mode. Just like generally always like encourage people, because I've met some people where it's just like, I just don't know, like, I don't know what my hobbies are. Like, I don't have any, or I don't do anything. Cause I think certainly like watching TV and movies, like I do that a lot, but I also try to do other things. And, just even makes me think of, just cause it's like, it could be anything of like, my wife does like adult coloring books now. It's like, that's a hobby. Yes, please do that. Like, just like, because I think it for her, it's like, mindless, but she does kind of go in with a plan of like how she wants to color or whatever. But yeah, and sometimes it's like, and like you said, you're just kind of making sawdust. Like, you don't always have to make a thing that is going to be functional and will, whatever, but you can just kind of go around and mess around and learn and kind of, yeah, like when you do need to make something, it's like, yeah, I messed up those other things, or just kind of seeing how this thing works. So it's like now I'm going in, if I do want to do something with more purpose and focus and precision and all that, you're kind of, yeah, you've gotten a lot of practice and all of that. So, yeah, it's really cool. So I'm curious now, just as a brief tangent, what is the kind of the most favorite thing that you have built in your woodworking shop?
I think probably what I show off the most are, so I built some wall cabinets, as I said, for my wife's craft room. But prior to that, I built a series of base cabinets, and I made her countertops out of wood for her craft room. And one of them, it's like a T-shape type where there's a peninsula that comes out in the wall for cutting fabric, and so she's into sewing and a lot of different things like that with embroidery and such. So making all that is something that I'd show off quite a bit when people come over. And like I said, I'm largely into utilitarian things. Once we get some more of that stuff done, we bought a fixer-upper house that needs a lot of work. I'm going to make the kitchen cabinets myself. But once we get some of that type of thing, those type of things done, I want to start transitioning into making furniture. So like curio cabinets and like standalone bookcases, and really think about the materials that I'm using and thinking critically about not just using plywood, but using solid wood, and then you have to think about how does the wood move, and if I use this type of joint in this species, is that a problem? And I don't know the answers to that stuff yet. That's part of the learning, and part of what excites me about it is that I've not delved into that area of woodworking just yet. But I kind of understand that, okay, there are things I need to think about first before I just start cutting up some wood and fastening it together.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think, just that, I can just imagine, I get like that sense of pride where it's like eventually you just walk around like, yeah, I built that, yep. And just that, like, and yeah, if it's like you're repurposing certain things, like, and then, just kind of, because, you don't know the answer yet, but it's like, this will come together in a way because like this piece has to go with, and it's going to be kind of a finite way that, it'll come together. And I mean, that you can start from wherever you want, but it's like, this needs to eventually become like a table. So like, there's only really one way that eventually these pieces will go together and I will figure it out. And then just, that pride and the confidence building of like, I don't know how I'm going to figure it out, but I have confidence that I can.
That's right.
And that's really awesome. Well, I guess now, so just kind of generally, whether it's kind of higher ed related or, woodworking related or what, but like what's the content that you're consuming? Like, what are you reading, watching, listening to? Like, what's the stuff that's grabbing your attention lately?
So I've gotten back into Star Wars novelizations of the Star Wars saga. And really the novels that seek to fill some of the holes or the gaps in the timeline of the story of the movies that we consume. And so I recently read, now I'm blanking on the name of it. It's basically the prequel to Rogue One.
Okay.
And it's a wonderful story, really well done. And then I discovered that the author of that book wrote another Star Wars story about Grand Moff Tarkin. And the title is Tarkin, and so I'm finishing it up right now. I almost finished it yesterday, so probably one more reading session, I'll be finished with it. But I'm usually reading multiple things at once. I'm also reading, speaking of woodworking, Good Clean Fun, which is one of Nick Offerman's books about woodworking. And I've got to say, it's hilarious. You can, like, if you've ever seen Nick Offerman on something, whether it's Parks and Rec or something else, just kind of his delivery that he has, you can picture him reading the book to you.
Right.
Because the way he wrote it is very much just the cadence of his speech pattern is reflected in his writing style. So it's really fun to read it. But it's also, I find it a little bit distracting because I'm picturing, okay, am I picturing this as Nick Offerman, a dude who's really into woodworking, as writing this book, or am I picturing it as his character from Parks and Rec? And trying to separate those two, because Nick Offerman, the person, is a little bit different than that character from Parks and Rec. But it's really cool though, because he's kind of telling the story about how he got into woodworking and how he's learned to refine his craft over the years. And then kind of gets into, so here's some plans for some projects you can build. I've built these too, and here are the lessons I learned as I built them, and hopefully you won't make the same mistakes that I did.
That's really cool. Yeah, because it's funny. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap with him and Ron Swanson. But they are distinct people. Yeah, but just the fact for many of the characters on Parks and Recreation is that they're I think. And I think that adds something, is that there's a lot of overlap with the actor and their character.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely with all that other stuff now, since he's moved on, and that show has ended and everything. Yeah, it's cool to see what he gets up to with, especially his woodworking stuff, which it's definitely one of those big overlaps into the Ron Swanson character. But man, that's cool stuff. And I guess anything else that you're watching shows, movies, or any podcasts that you're into lately?
So one of the challenges I have with kind of consuming audio and video content is, if it's not on Disney Junior, I have a hard time getting TV time to watch it, because we have a 5-year-old, and she is very much a daddy's girl and has me wrapped around her finger. And so it's difficult for me to get that time. I also really don't have a commute. We live about 3 minutes from campus. And so where when I was at LSU, I had at least a half-hour commute. That was a great time to consume podcasts or other content. For a while, I was trying to keep up with You Got This, which is a podcast by Dr. Katie Linder, that's geared very much toward academicians. And I love her content, but I found that when I was listening while I was trying to work, I wasn't focusing on work because I was focusing on what she was sharing. And so as I thought about starting a podcast myself, I thought, okay, what about, so there's so many podcasts that are half hour to an hour in length, some maybe more, and they're very much billed as, well, this is great content to consume while you're commuting. Well, what if there are other folks like me who don't really have that commute, but I've probably got 15 minutes I can spare here and there in my day. And so Katie Linder's stuff is generally in that same time range of that 15 minutes. I just have to have that space in the day where I can carve out that time, take a little break, and just sit and let myself enjoy that content.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting point to bring up, because it's I'll do that a lot. I'll be oh, I need to do dishes, or I need to do some laundry or something, and I'll put a podcast on, and certain ones, I sense myself getting too distracted because I really want to pay attention. So I think it certainly makes more sense maybe for some rather than others, where it's no, really focus your attention, and maybe if it is maybe some tasks that you can do mindlessly or something, but if you can, just give it your full attention. If you want to just take a break and go for a walk and just listen, that would be good, versus trying to oh, well, let me answer emails while I'm listening to a podcast. No, that does require mental energy, and you're probably not fully doing either. But yeah, I mean, commutes are a typical thing, or I imagine just walking, or doing the dishes, or folding laundry. It's sure, that's something you can put in the background, but some, deserve our full attention, try to give them the space to do that. I recently kind of discovered her podcast. I've been cherry picking some episodes about different topics that she talks about, but So yeah, we'll link out to that one for folks to check out. But yeah, I mean, we'll wrap up here kind of with the kind of optimistic ending question here. Just something that you're looking forward to in your job and life or the world. Just anything that you're just looking forward to. Yeah.
Yeah, I try to be an optimistic person, which although if any former students or current students listen to this, they may question that because I'm sometimes labeled as being very cynical, and because I bring in a lot of critical perspectives into my professional work. So something I'm really excited about and looking forward to is I'm working on a book-length project that is based on a study I worked on last summer where I conducted interviews, and I've got data from 50 individual interviews with student affairs folks from every segment of the field in terms of experience in the field. So graduate students, new professionals, mid-managers, directors, vice presidents, faculty, and a wide swath of institution types and functional areas represented. And what we talked about in those interviews were their perceptions of the role of social justice in student affairs practice. And where do they see social justice fitting in kind of our professional values, and where they think we are as a field when it comes to that actually being a central value. So I'm real excited to get that rolling. I've done some of the preliminary analysis and getting ready to dive in and kind of go through and do the deep qualitative analysis of all those interviews.
Yeah, that could be huge. I mean, just to see across the board, just both of those aspects of just like the importance of it and like where they see it right now. And so I guess I don't know if that'll be kind of how you frame it as like kind of past, present, future, or whatever. But I mean, yeah, it's just like you said, it's kind of like in vogue. It's part of the zeitgeist a lot right now. But and it's just like that. How you framed it, I feel like that's definitely a fallacy that people have, is like people who are really like critical. It's like, I imagine they're just like pessimistic because they're always just kind of saying like, we should change this isn't right, or whatever. It's like, well, no, I believe in the potential of us to be better. So I just want to like hold us to that standard. So I'm just going to like, be more outward, I guess, with that, and just kind of provide a, critical analysis of things and really try to push us moving forward continuously. So part of that is just kind of doing that kind of deep dive examination and seeing across the board, and not just like, sometimes you'll see stuff and it's just like it's a very small segment. It's like, well, it's not really applicable to this other institution type, or just kind of the field as a whole or anything like that. But so that's really excited that he'll be working on that, and that will I guess be out in the world in the somewhat near future.
I hope so.
Yeah. Cool. So I guess, and I guess I didn't acknowledge it before. It just circled back in my mind. I very much appreciate that you read Star Wars novelizations. I feel like I need to get back into that, because I did that like so much before they did the whole kind of like, washing away of the, the continuity when, Disney bought Lucasfilm and stuff. So like I read a lot of those books like when I was in high school, because like, I got to read stuff anyway. I'm going to like read Star Wars novelizations of the expanded universe. So I appreciate that, because I guess it's better. It's a little bit more like cohesive. Like I think they're designing it a little bit better than they did before. But there's it's just a big, awesome universe in Star Wars. And that's part of what I love about it.
I was reading those back in the late 80s and into the 90s, and depending on which series you got into, some of them kind of strayed a little bit from, I guess, what we would now consider Star Wars canon. Although, like I say, it's like that concept has changed since Disney purchased the franchise. Mm-hmm. So something I do appreciate is that there is more cohesiveness now, that you can watch the films, read the novels, and you feel like there is a clear connection and a continuity across them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think generally for both of us, I'm sure, also looking forward to more great Star Wars content in the future, because I think they're righting the ship a little bit. Everyone is like all kind of soured on the prequels, but yeah, I mean, they've got like novels, they've got comics, they've got a lot of good content coming out, and we're kind of getting spoiled with good Star Wars movies every year now. So
yeah,
cool. Well, yeah, I'll link out to everything we talked about in this episode in the show notes. Just really appreciate your time, Brian, and yeah, it's always good talking to you. So,
all right, you too, Dustin.
This podcast is a proud member of the Connect EDU podcast network, bringing together diverse voices and thoughtful discussions to the higher ed community. Check us out online at connectedu.network or on Twitter at connectedupod. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. Please rate, review, and subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.